We are live, and now we are live. So Jesse, thank you for being here. Really appreciate your time as
My
always.
pleasure.
Um, and for the investors that are here, and for all you guys watching this recording, really excited to share another hour of Jesse's wisdom with you guys. And I truly believe, Yannick's always taught me that the better your questions, the better the answers that you'll get out of life and out of people and out of mentors. And I definitely know that to be true with Jesse. Even if you don't ask him questions, he'll share a lot of wisdom. But it's like a ton of it, right? Kind of like from every direction. And if you come and ask really, really good questions that are specific to you, that can help you take that next big leap or step in your life, or even incremental next step forward, you'll kind of take all this wisdom that Jesse has and narrow it down into specifically what's going to be really helpful for you. So through this conversation, I encourage you to come up with specific questions, things that can really, really help you. The advantage of having this more private hangout with Maverick Next members versus a big public webinar is that Jesse can probably go a little bit deeper on some of his answers than maybe he would in a larger public forum, but also that that the specificity, the follow-up conversation that you get to have more than just typing a webinar a question into a webinar chat box. So encourage really highly curated conversation here. So with that, I'll for those watching the recording, I'll do a quick introduction of Jesse. He's got a pretty amazing story as an entrepreneur. Initially building out kind of something a lot more scaled up in the martial arts field, and then walking away from all of that. Kind of almost like echoes some of what Yannick talks about in Evolved Enterprise. Like he felt something within him that had to come out that was so much greater than anything he'd done to date, and he wanted to go explore what that was, and that's kind of what brings us here today. And there's been this really amazing journey of self-exploration, self-mastery that Jesse has gone down, and then through that, the message that has continued to come through him to the world that he's shared very effectively meaning that it has actually reached people and has changed their lives, and also very profitably, meaning that he's been able to curate that message in a way that, or put that message out there in a way that has brought financial abundance back to him while still remaining fully in integrity, fully in flow, and has designed his life the way that he truly wants to live, versus the hustle that we see with a lot of the entrepreneurial community, where the lifestyle doesn't always match the success of the business. So with that, Jesse, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate your time and always just sharing your path and your wisdom with us.
The pleasure and honor is absolutely mutual, and I'm especially looking forward to digging into whatever the hell is going to happen, because I know whatever the questions are, even if there are no questions, just the vibe of this whole gathering is going to take the ideas of marketing and entrepreneurship, and as Yannick and you guys put it, Evolved Enterprise, it's going to take it further than it's ever been just from this call. So very, very excited to be on the leading edge with you guys.
Awesome. Love that. So I do have my burning question that I'm really excited to ask, but first I would love, both for the recording and for the people on here that might not know as much of your story, so you just shared it on the webinar with us. I would love it if you could spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, going into a little bit of your background and history, going from the martial arts world to what you're doing now, and just some of that path along the way, so people have perspective for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, something that I did not share in the webinar that we just did, that I think is incredibly relevant, but it's not always accessible to people. But within this privacy here, I'll just go for the philosophical jugular. Only results count, and theory is a luxury for after you become rich. Theory is a luxury for after you become wealthy, in whatever way you measure wealth. And any theory that does not produce a measurable result is a luxury that we really can't afford. And there's a shitload of marketing theory that sounds cool and converts well, but actually causes people to go broke. And so I learned this early on in the martial arts, and I got this not because I was so philosophically focused. I was just a teenager, man. I just loved the martial arts. I was really super shy. Man, I didn't kiss a girl till I was 19, which to me, I felt like I was at middle age already by the time that happened. And I was very socially awkward, very shy. And so martial arts was this outlet for me to really kind of have this self-expression. But something else happened when I was 19. Totally, although it actually, ironically, now that I say that, it did involve the same girl. I just put that together in my head. Philosophies are colliding here. Yeah, so I had a crush on this girl, and I'd been doing martial arts for like 10 years at that point. I started when I was 9 years old, and I went to this party at this woman's house, and it was great. Like I thought, man, this is really cool. I'm living this life. It's perfect. It was just one of those great like Friday or Saturday nights. And turns out that there's a guy there who didn't like me very much. And I asked her about it. I said, what's the deal with that guy over there? She's like, oh, him. That's my boyfriend. I'm like, what? How did you not tell me you had a boyfriend? She's like, yeah, well, we're not really together right now, but he thinks we are. I'm like, what? It's getting worse. And I'm like, all right, well, here's the deal. I don't want to make things weird, and I just said, you know what? Let me just bow out of this. So I would just take myself out of the situation. So I'm walking down the driveway on my way to my car, and this guy jumps on me. Apparently, he'd been, having plenty of party favors. But he'd been talking about to all his friends how he's going to show this guy a lesson and blah, 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 this guy being me. So I'm walking through the driveway, and this guy jumps on me. We fall to the ground, and immediately I'm like on my back, like, what's going on? We're on the asphalt, and this guy is just like throwing these giant sloppy punches, and I went from being a second-degree black belt, seasoned tournament competitor to this. Instinct completely took over, and I didn't even have time to think about it. But I remember in the back of my mind, there's this little voice saying, don't worry, it's all good. The referee's going to say stop. You're going to stand up. That's what happens in a tournament. Somebody slips, you fall down, you stand back up. And as these eternal seconds just kept taking forever to tick by, I realized there is no referee. Oh, shit. This is a fight, not a match. And all of a sudden I was just reduced to just like scrabbling to this guy. Luckily somebody pulled him off of me. We stood up, and this guy is just screaming all this profanity. I'm like adrenalized like I never felt before in my life. He's screaming at my unborn children. He's screaming at my ancestors. This guy's insulting every branch of my family tree he can think of. And then he lunges towards me again. And I just had this little like training kicked in now that we were standing, and I just launched this kick off my back leg, this roundhouse kick, hit him in the head. He fell down like a tree, and I looked, and he was still moving. He was okay, but I thought, man, I'm out of here. I get in my car, took off, and I'd never been so. I was very scared because I'd never been in a fight before. I'd been in probably by that time over 100 matches, but I'd never actually been in a fight. And it was up until that point probably the most disheartening experience of my life. It was like finding out that Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy don't exist like on the same day. It was a billion times worse than that. I just realized that all these things that I believed my whole life, all of a sudden they fell apart when faced with reality. And I really went on a mission, and I didn't know it at the time, although in retrospect it's very clear. But I realized that my training basically had failed me, and I didn't blame my instructors. I didn't feel like I was misled. I think they did the best they could, given what they knew, so they weren't lying to me. They weren't covering anything up. They just didn't know. And none of them had ever been in a real fight. And so they were just kind of passing on tradition and theory and wonderful workouts. It was beautiful art that I've been practicing, But when faced with reality, that art fell apart. And so I began training and seeking out different kinds of training. I started training jiu-jitsu, which at that point was still, kind of making its way into the martial arts world. And, the first UFC had just come out and, all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was really a very formative time. But I was so willing to be humble and not think that I have this ego and I'm a second-degree black belt and all this stuff, because I saw how that had gotten my instructors in trouble, where they said, oh, we already know this. As a matter of fact, I asked one of my instructors very humbly, I said, what should I do if somebody jumps on me and takes me to the ground? And you know what his answer was? He said, you have to train your sidekick better so that they can't do that to you. And I knew in that moment that he was still my mentor, still my instructor, but he wasn't qualified to teach me how to fight. And that really began a very interesting phase of my journey, where I began to just have this ruthless focus on results. If it doesn't produce results, I'm not interested in it. And fast forward a couple of years, I had taken a job as a bouncer. I was now like 20, 21 years old, I guess, and took a job as a bouncer to just help pay bills, and I was getting ready to open my school. And the club that I bounced at, Sneakers Nightclub, San Antonio, Texas, is a seedy little rock and roll club. I mean, this is where bands either went to be born and become something, or they went to die. I mean, it was like there was no in between. And so it was like this really kind of sweaty, dirty, smelly environment. But they started having these on Thursday nights. Was a very slow night, and they started having fight nights. And to shorten the story, they just said, we'll just, anybody who wants to come in and fight, we'll roll a mat out on the dance floor, and we don't care what your criteria is. They didn't even have waivers. They just it was these underground little things just to bump attendance. And I was faced with a philosophical dilemma. And I realized that I've been doing all this training, trying to figure out if what I know really works. And if I don't do now, I have to just stop teaching martial arts, because I can't, in integrity, I can't continue to teach the things that I've been teaching. So I signed up to fight on the very first night and went in there and had 2 matches, ended up winning both of them, although they were a little bit of a blur. But I remember thinking that, holy shit, like my training is paying off. All the things that I've been trying on the mat and in the gym and in my school have actually produced a result against a real opponent who is trying to knock me out with no rules, no gloves, no rules, no weight limit, no time limit. Literally just 2 guys walk in the ring and only one person walks out, or you go until you quit. And it was brutal. And I certainly don't recommend that for anybody who just wants to improve their marketing. I'm not saying that you need to go and be a fucking street brawler to prove it. But what that did for me is it really caused me to fall in love with results theory. What I now call action philosophy that actually is actionable, doesn't just feel good in an academic environment, but actually produces measurable results when you go and use it in the marketplace, which is the ultimate arena. And that's why I love capitalism. That's why I love the merging of spirituality and science that's happening right now on the planet. It has been happening for a few decades. This is why I absolutely love free market economy and laissez-faire economics, because it allows for the creators to continue to rise. And it doesn't matter what you knew 10 years ago. There's only actually 3 things that matter. And for anybody that's interested, I'd be more than happy to share an audio that I've recorded this audio for a private client. It's 14 minutes, very, very quick, but it's about the new currency. Money is actually dying. Money is as we know it, is on its way out, and is being displaced by actually more effective methods of wealth exchange. And so, if anybody's interested, Dimitri, I'll send that to you, and then I'm happy with you sharing it in this group. But there are 3 components of this new wealth, and then we'll open up to some questions here in a second. But the money and wealth are completely different things. Money is basically is game pieces in an arbitrary system. Money by itself has no energy. Money by itself has no power. It is only a piece that you can move around the board according to the intentions of the players. So money by itself is inert. Wealth, on the other hand, wealth is an energy. And so money and wealth are two completely different things. Many people that have a lot of money actually do not have very much wealth, and vice versa. Many people that are incredibly wealthy don't have that much money. Not to say that the two are mutually exclusive. You can have as much of both as you would like, but to think of them as the same thing is actually a mistake. So the three components of the new currency are, first is intuition, the ability to tap into your own inner signal that's always there. Call it spiritual, like spiritual GPS. It's your own sense of right and wrong, your own sense of innate wisdom of what's right for you, independent of whether other people are thinking or feeling. Empathy is very important. We've got these mirror neurons firing in our heads that are, helping us reflect with one another, and that's very beautiful and very uniquely human. But to operate according to somebody else's approval or fear of disapproval is a handicap. So first skill for the new currency is intuition. Second is inspiration. And when you tap into what inspires you, you very quickly don't have competition. And then the third criteria is adaptability. So if you have intuition, that becomes inspiration, and then you're adaptable to express that in the world, then it doesn't matter what you've been doing for the last 3 years. It doesn't matter how good you are at insert the skill set, coding or coaching or writing or whatever it is. Intuition, inspiration, and adaptability are three things that anybody can become a practitioner of, and that's where the newest fortunes are gonna be made.
Awesome. I love that. And this segues perfectly into the burning question that I had, because you just shared a path of self-mastery as it relates to like the reality of the marketplace or the fighting ring or life, right? And where I'm at right now is, Jesse, I think you mentioned before this call that you'd see my Facebook status, and I've shared a little bit with you about where I'm at. So external reality is a bit crazy right now. There's a lot of stuff. And I've realized that I'm not going to solve my problems through rearranging external reality right now, because there's certain commitments I can drop or delegate or delay or whatever, but for the most part there's very much a limit to what I can do about that to make it a simpler game in the short term.
Yes.
And so in terms of inner game and self-mastery, in terms of how I'm showing up to that external reality, I realize that that's where at least 80% of the power around what the next 90 days looks like for me lies. And I don't always feel that I'm showing up in that highest self to deal with the reality that I've set up for myself externally. So the question, and I'll answer it in kind of an open way, but I'm curious to see what comes up for you, is in that path of self-mastery, obviously there's through all of your experiences, there's been a lot of discipline developed, and there's also more recently been a lot of freedom and flow and the balance of that developed. So to put simply, question would be, if there are top, let's say, one thing, three things, five things that come to mind for you, either as it relates to my situation or anybody else is kind of navigating or dealing with something like this, or when you've dealt with these things, what have been your go-to, like, very practical things that you dive into for a greater sense of self-mastery to deal with pretty insane external realities?
Love it. So there's a very basic philosophy that all fighters use and all entrepreneurs use, and we're just going to put some words to it, and that's the eye of the hurricane. And anybody who you study weather patterns, or you just Google that shit, what you'll very quickly see is, we all know what the hurricane looks like, and we know what hurricanes are capable of. Incredibly powerful winds and this potentially destructive forces. And yet, at the center of every hurricane is the eye, and the eye of the hurricane is blue skies, calm water, almost eerily calm. Like there's just a vacuum of influence. There's no pressure, there's no wind, there's nothing. It's just that 0 point, almost like quantum stillness. It's just there. And every entrepreneur, every human being has that eye in them. And it's the ability, and it is an ability. It's not a latent talent. It's not something that you're born with or you're not. It's a skill. But the ability to experience that I as an ongoing part of your reality is completely cultivatable. It can be practiced. It can be felt. It can be experienced. It can even be quantified, and you can measure where you are in relationship to the eye of the hurricane. This has been popularized in a lot of religions and a lot of spiritual practices as detachment. The challenge with the detachment is that a lot of the guys and some women, but a lot of men over history that popularized this notion of just relinquish your desires. And I'm not picking on anybody, but some of the favorites that I've learned from, Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and even you look at Jesus, and you look at Muhammad, and you look at Gautama or Buddha, who became the Buddha. You look at all of these ancient characters, and they all had stillness and peace as like this seemingly always on thing. And you know what? That every single one of those people had in common. None of them had Wi-Fi. None of them had Facebook. None of them had iPhones. None of them had Bumble and Twitter and Tinder and Pokemon Go, and they didn't have a billion channels, and they didn't have marketers like us getting in front of their face all the time. They lived in a really boring time. There wasn't that much going on. So the eye of the hurricane was fairly normal to experience. So the question is, how do you make that real for yourself? I can prove to anybody in 90 seconds that you don't have any problems. And we'll do it right now. If you guys got 90 seconds. Right now, and I do mean now, right now, you actually have no problems. And here's how I can say this with total confidence. Because now, if you've got the ears to hear this and you've got the eyes to watch this video, right now, you actually have no problems. Any problems that you might perceive occupy one of two places in your mind right now. They're either in the past or they're in the future. And since neither the past nor the future actually exist, since all there actually is ever is now, then if you have the available attention right now to participate in this message, that means you actually right now don't have any problems. You may have a thought come in about something that you think is going to happen at some point in the future, or you might have a thought come in about something that you believe happened in the past. But right now, you actually have no problems, and you can breathe deeply in the knowledge that there are no problems right now. There's only the anticipation of a problem in the future, or the memory of a problem in the past, but that's only because you're directing your available attention in the present moment toward that imaginary past or that imaginary future. But right now, which is all there is no problem. And when we allow ourselves, and that might have been a little bit longer than 90 seconds, but when we allow ourselves to widen that gap and allow ourselves to experience more purely the actual potentiality in this present moment, then new awarenesses begin to surface. And instead of skipping from one moment of past to future, past to future, past to future, and just continually leapfrogging the present, which is what most people do, you actually engage the most human of qualities, which is full present moment awareness. And present moment awareness is a fucking superpower for those people that actually practice it. And I don't mean, people hear practice, you think it's like check that box, oh, he practices meditation. No, it's a practice. Like, when you're only as good as your last meditation. you're only as good as your last workout. I mean, if somebody says, oh, I've been hydrating well for 3 years, well, you got like a 36-hour shelf life on that shit. So it doesn't matter what you did a year ago as far as hydration goes. Or somebody says, oh, I've been a practicing breatharian now for 41 seconds. Great, buddy. I'm not that impressed. If you tell me you've been only living on breath for, because I'm going to start picking on that woo shit in a second. But the point is that all we have is now, and if you're thinking about the future, you're only thinking about it now. And if you're thinking about the past, you're only thinking about it now. And by practicing that on a consistent basis, even going back and finding that 2 or 3 minute block of dialogue in this recording, those words, the linguistics in that specific line of mental code is very carefully designed to erode an outdated mode of being. A little spoken word for you there, Dima.
Love it. I appreciate you speaking my language. Beautiful. So those, let's say, all of the problems in the future, or anticipation of problems, anticipation of problems with the vision of the path that I or somebody else is walking down, creep into the present, or let's say we proactively want to deal with them in the present moment. What do you do in keeping that state that you cultivate through the power of presence, right?
Yeah.
The purity of that presence, in now diving in somehow with that state, not losing it, into diving into the problems, whether they're of the future or of the present or whatever, but the things that we have to navigate and deal with.
That's a great question.
Anything else that comes up as specific practices to either cultivate that long term or bring it into the moment.
Yeah, something just really hit me when I was hearing you phrase that. Most of us are so conditioned before our minds are even, before your physical brain is even matured. We're so conditioned to think things that aren't true. And so my question has always, not, I shouldn't say always, very much in the last 10 years, and more specifically in the last 3 or 4 years, my question is not what's true, my question is what's useful. And as I begin to explore my own ability to hack reality, and as I begin as I continue to split test paradigms, and as I continue to find what's the control that I can beat in terms of my own perceptual frameworks, for somebody to become more powerfully present is not about accumulating more skills. We don't need to accumulate skills. We've been conditioned to think that we have to accumulate skills so that we can solve problems that we think we have to solve so that we can then have what we want, which is actually peace and power. We want to have peace of mind, freedom from fear, safety, security, and we want to have power to execute, power to implement, power to express. And most people are just operating, and I did for years, and I'm sure I still do, but most people are operating under extremely limiting premises. We're operating under very false premises, actually, that have nothing to do with the physical nature of reality. Number one on the list, and I'll just jump right in and say it here with you guys, number one is the idea that we can die. And so people spend their entire lives trying to avoid their perceived end of their existence. I didn't find that to be a particularly useful frame, so I stopped believing in death. And I don't believe that I can die. I actually don't believe anybody can die. I don't think energy can end. And so far, I've got the backing of, I don't mean like sponsorship, but I mean like the philosophical, conceptual backing of the brightest quantum physicists that have ever lived and that are living today. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transmuted and transformed. And I don't know what life is other than compressed energy that's individuated into these units of consciousness we call human beings, trees, plants, etc. So you have to investigate your premises. If somebody's afraid to die, then that's going to affect how the rest of their life is going to show up. And I'm not afraid to die. As far as I'm concerned, I'm already dead, because I think when it happens, when that moment comes, it's just going to be a transition into whatever's next. Now, I'm not saying this is the truth. I've just found it to be the most useful frame I've found yet. And when I stopped being afraid of dying, I stopped being afraid to live. And I stopped being afraid to make mistakes. I stopped being afraid of judgment. I stopped being afraid of other people's approval or lack of approval. I stopped needing permission. I released a whole host of irrational fears that were keeping me stuck, including fear of bankruptcy, fear of poverty, fear of judgment, fear of losing my reputation. And now I don't give a fuck about any of those things. And beautifully, ironically, I care more about people now than I've ever cared about somebody. I mean, you guys are getting like the real deal today. Demi, I don't know what your magic is, dude, but I feel like you're like James Lipton in the actor studio. I'm about to start crying here. But Kevin liked that comment. But the idea is that I find myself caring less and less and less about what other people think, and caring more and more and more about people. And I call it open heart, thick skin. Like that's the frame that I use. And in terms of, back to make this practical for somebody else, how do we achieve this present moment awareness? Well, how about this? How about nobody actually gives two fucks what you are doing anywhere near as much as you think they do? Are people relying on you? Of course they are. But you know what the greatest freedom in the world is? Greatest freedom in the world is allowing other people to have their own experience. And the greatest gift in the world is the gift of your own happiness and well-being. And so if we reprioritize and make our own happiness and our own well-being the most important thing in our life, and we really begin to see the influence that has on other people from a place of need-free connection, because we don't need them to be different for us to be happy. They're free to have their own experience. We're free to have ours. Well, then you start to operate in this sphere, this social sphere, personally, professionally. You begin to operate in a way where each person is a sovereign individual, completely self-authorized. They're free to have their experience, and there's like this innate, deeply powerful trusting to the entire process. I don't know if this is just philosophical or if this is practical at all, but this is how I've chosen to live, and literally every day gets better, man.
Yeah, this is extremely useful to me. I'm absolutely loving it. I've got obviously more follow-up questions and conversation here. I do want to open it up to the rest of the group. Kevin, Lawrence, Sebastian, Bren, Dan. Anybody have any specific or topical questions for Jesse? By topical, I don't mean topical, but any kind of topic.
Apply liberally.
I have a question.
What's up, Lawrence?
Hey, so it sounds like you kind of go back and forth between two things. One which is like thinking really long term, thinking really high level, philosophical, but also you're like really like the results are really important to you. So I feel like when you're trying to operate on the high level, like high concept, more theoretical things, how do you make sure that those things, how do you make sure that you still see results in the short term, so to say, so that it's not all theory?
Yeah, good. Metrics, in a word, metrics. And I don't know who to give. Well, I'll credit Dan Sullivan with this but I don't know who the guy is that he talked about. But Dan Sullivan talks about Pearson's law, and Pearson's law says that which is measured improves, that which is measured and recorded improves dramatically. And so, in terms of seeing real results, logic is actually an app. It's not the OS. And so the ability to think through and strategically control every possible outcome is a great exercise in mental masturbation, but it fails to take into consideration this incredibly vibrant living universe that we're actually a part of. And so when you have intention, but you also back up that intention with KPIs, it's incredible how resourceful your brain will be to find the right actions, the resources, the resourcefulness to move that needle. And this is what a lot of folks in the quote-unquote spiritual community won't do. They're pure intention, and they just don't measure. Because they're like, oh, it doesn't matter. The universe will work itself out. No, the universe actually doesn't give a fuck. The universe is completely neutral, but it's also very consistent. So we can use that for our own advancement. So in a nutshell, man, metrics. Whatever you measure is going to improve. And I'll say one more piece on that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I made this mistake for years, where I thought that study and training were the same thing. And what I mean by that is, I thought if I just watch some Gracie Jiu-Jitsu videos, that's cool. Okay, I got it. But no, in the real pressure of the ring, you don't got it. You forget immediately. And so what you have to do is you have to pick a technique, and you have to drill that technique over and over and over again. Training is not study. Study is like this voyeuristic assimilation of ideas. So you read books and you listen to podcasts and interviews and all that kind of stuff. Training is you pick one fucking thing and you do it over and over and over and over again until your eyes feel like you're going to bleed, you think you're going to throw up, you have a headache, your back hurts, your knees are aching, you feel like there's anything in the planet you'd rather be doing than this thing again, and you go and do it again and again. You're not I don't mean you, Lawrence, but we're not fragile, we're not going to break, but mentally, most of us are incredibly weak. And so no wonder why when we go and get on the, let's say, I mean, I do a lot of sales with, one-on-one, so I'll get on the phone with somebody, and I'm going to ask for, I won't get on the phone for less than a $5,000 sale. So if I'm going to get on the phone with somebody, they're going to, we're going to talk about a $5,000 offer minimum. But for me to practice on them is, at best, is disrespectful. At worst, is a complete dereliction of my duty as a provider and an entrepreneur. So guess what? I'm going to be practicing over and over and over again. And I don't mean like handle objections and all this. I just mean there's a structure to having a high-value conversation that I've proven pretty successful in a few thousand enrollment conversations. And I just know that those people that train privately are rewarded publicly. So I don't know what your version of training would be, but it has, when you combine those two elements of deep practice, training, with measurement of KPIs, the cracks seem to fill in very, very beautifully. I don't know if that's relevant, Lawrence.
Yeah, it is. So quick follow-up question on that. Let's say you have a theory on something, and then you set a practice protocol for yourself. How do you make sure that as you develop that practice, it actually fits with reality and gets you results?
Good.
Because you could be practicing like for a certain thing and then not, like when that time comes, it might not actually net you a result.
Yep.
Especially for things where you don't have as much opportunities to generate a lot of metrics in.
Okay. There's always baseline metrics. There's always baseline. And if you go back, even if you go back 2 weeks on the specific KPI, there's a trend that's already there. So all you have to do is retroactively measure the existing trend and then mark it from that point forward. Begin your training, begin applying. Man, I get fired up talking about this because this is how you hack reality. Literally, I mean, I teach people something called the money map, which is a simple concept, but there's some nuances there. And again, Dima, I'm happy to give this link to anybody that's interested in it. But it's like a 20-minute video outlining the money map. Every time somebody applies this, they make more money. And this is with no strategic help, no tactical advice, no conceptual advice. It's like, just do this, and you'll start to see the result. And so retroactively look at your KPIs, but more importantly, it's like GPS. Where are you? Where do you want to be? Those are the only two things that actually matter. So where are you now? Where do you want to be? And every day measure your progress, no matter how slight. And this is huge. Progress only exists retroactively. You cannot measure progress in front of you. You can never get close to the horizon. Every time you take a step closer, the horizon moves too. Success, whatever that means, is the same way. So you can only measure progress by looking backwards. So that means you take a step forward, you go through your day, and at the end of the day, you look at what happened. That's an indicator of your desires coming true, no matter how abstract or granular it might be. You'll begin to see a trend, and then your brain, right before you drop into sleep, you're entering into that subconscious, unconscious realm where you literally, your mind has contact with cosmic Google. And if you prime your mind going into sleep that this is what I noticed today, this is what I saw today, if it's relative to my desires, drop into sleep with that shit and watch what happens the next day. You do that for 30 days, you have a brand new life. I can count on two hands the number of people that have ever done 30 days. Everybody quits before then because things get so good they can't handle it, and they stop doing it. They hit an upper limit.
Jesse, could you go into that exercise again real quick? I know you shared it with us in person in San Diego, and you kind of covered some of it now as far as the philosophy behind it. There was a specific thing you had written on a piece of paper, and then you wake up with. What was the thing real quick?
Yeah. That was the single biggest. I don't like the term takeaway because it's like a bullshit seminar term, I think. But it was one of the biggest insights of the tour. 19 cities, over 400 people. This is probably the best tool that came out of that, and that is this nighttime process. So only three things you have to do. Number one, you got to know kind of what your desires are. Like what is it that you actually want to bring about in your experience? Call it manifest, call it create. What do you want to have happen? And then every night you write down 3, 4, or 5 things that happened that day. And maybe it's just like an observation you had, I want to get a plane, so, I'm tired of TSA fondling me, and I want to have my own plane. I don't want TSA anymore. So what happens is I'll see somebody that has a plane, or I'll talk to somebody that has a plane, and that makes it onto my list. Anything that's related to your desires. So you write down 3, 4, 5 things that are related to your desires, write them down before you go to sleep. Then what you do is you write down how you want to feel when you wake up. And those two might not seem to be related, but they're actually very related because the feelings that you have on a consistent basis are very much connected to what's showing up in your life. And I don't mean that in like a law of attraction way. I do mean it in terms of a receptivity and resourcefulness. Generally, the better you feel, the more resourceful you are. So you write down your indicators of desire, 3, 4, 5 things that happened. Then you write down how you want to feel when you wake up in the morning. And then you take the piece of paper, you fold it, and I don't know why this works, I just know that it does. You put it under your pillow and you sleep on it. Then you wake up in the morning, and this is the third part. First is you have your desires. Second, you write down 3, 4, or 5 things, how you want to feel in the morning. And the third part is, in the morning when you wake up, before you open your eyes and you hook back into your reality, just notice how you're feeling. That's it. And give a little shout out to yourself the night before, because you will be feeling differently. You put that you put that query into Cosmic Google, you hit enter, and then you go to sleep. And as you're sleeping, your conscious and your subconscious mind is connecting with superconscious intelligence. Call that whatever you want. And then when you wake up, you pick up a more mature. When you wake up, you pick up a more mature version of that energy that you set in motion when you went to sleep. This can sound woo-woo as fuck, and nobody even needs to believe it. Just test it for yourself and prove whether or not it's useful. So when you wake up in the morning, you open your eye, or you wake up, but you just realize that, okay, this is what's going on, this is how I feel. And before you open your eyes and hook back into your reality, just allow yourself to notice what you're thinking, notice what you're feeling. Literally, that's all you need to do is just give a little bit of airtime mentally, emotionally, because you're going to feel new ideas coming in. You're going to feel new sensations. You're going to have different thoughts about the same things, or you're going to have, old thoughts that are always trending towards accomplishment. This is evolution. This is what evolution is not the striving for more. It's the removal of resistance so that the impulse of life can flourish. And every time the impulse of life becomes too much for an existing structure, that structure cracks apart, is displaced, and something new comes along. Dinosaurs are replaced by mammals. Blockchain is displacing old centralized systems. I mean, all this stuff is happening and it's fantastic, but it's very predictable. So, a little bit of a rant there. Write down what happened that day, how you want to feel when you wake up, and when you wake up in the morning, just notice how you're feeling. And those slight improvements to your own frequency, your own focus, will multiply, and within 30 days, you have an entirely new trajectory.
Awesome. Thank you. I'd love to do an extra challenge with whoever's up to doing that. Just kind of keep track of your progress with it.
I'll tell you what, I won't be surprised to see you guys go past 10 days. And I don't mean this as a challenge. I know this sounds like a bullshit takeaway. I don't think you can do it. I literally have had 8 people tell me that they've made it through 30 days, and every one of them, the least gain was a doubling in income. And these are not people running small deals. I mean, big shit happens when you allow your frequency to be tuned.
Awesome. And then one more thing I'll add to Lawrence's question as kind of another answer that Jesse alluded to several times, or said specifically several times throughout this hangout, which was what's true versus what's useful. So Lawrence, I think that as a frame for your question is probably very helpful. So kind of continuously looking at whether it's in what you're studying or whether it's in even the on a meta level, the question itself being a little bit theoretical, like in that theory of whatever comes out, asking yourself truly what's useful versus trying to seek some sort of truth that you probably won't find. As truth in itself can not really be expressed through the human language, but you can find what's useful, and that will change for everybody depending on what's useful for you. So trying on the stuff that Jesse teaches or that anybody else out of a mentor network teaches, and then seeing what's really useful for you based on measuring it.
Yes, the usefulness versus truth, very, very, very powerful. People like to seek truth, I believe, because inherently our brains are kind of efficient. We're ruthlessly efficient. And the moment we can classify something as true, we don't have to think about it anymore. And that may be awesome. But it's like saying, once I have all the programs loaded onto my computer, I don't need any more programs. Or you could just stream everything through your device that you could ever imagine having, including all the newest shit that's coming down. So, given the choice between an old school hard drive that I'm cramming my 20 favorite movies onto, or having fiber access to all the indie shit that's coming out, I'll take the latter. I don't want to have a container. I'd rather have a conduit, and I think that's certainly where the world is trending. And those of us that can subjugate our ego a little bit instead of saying, "I know the truth," fuck, man, that's how religions are formed. And I have a lot of respect for the good that religions do. I also think that religions fuck a lot of people's shit up too. So.
Yeah, Jesse, I've seen you do that really well with even your presence of just becoming the conduit versus the library, and that's been that's been something that I've seen within you and certain other more modern thought leaders, where it's not just like an accumulation of things and then being able to pull from that accumulation. But there's some of that, but then there's also this like kind of open channel for things to come through you, and you're able to synthesize through awareness your experience of the world and channel it into something that's new and functional and useful, and that's how you give your gift versus like this intentional stacking of things that you've learned into something through logic.
Well, I appreciate your perspective on that a lot, more than I can tell you. If I was intent on selling seminars and putting butts in seats, I would have a very different approach to content development. But the personal development content, if I can call it that, the personal development content that I share is open source. It is intellectual community property, and it's public domain. So nothing would thrill me more than having somebody go to the tour, have their recorder going, transcribe that shit, send it to rev.com or Fiverr, whoever else they want, put a cool logo on it, put their name on it, and sell the shit out of it, and send me a message saying, dude, I just made $15,000 selling, notes from Quantum Forever, or whatever the fuck they want to call it. Like, I love that. Nothing would make me happier. So I'm not about accumulation of content. I'm about an acknowledgement of limitless supply, and the formulation of that through badass linguistics.
I love it. So guys, we've got about 5 minutes here. I want to open it up to any other questions from any.
Cool. I'll go.
Awesome. Sebastian.
Sebastian.
Okay. Yeah, man. Good to see you again.
Likewise.
Awesome. So the question is, say in the enrollment conversation where it's who's a great fit for whatever program is being offered, and it's perhaps a time where standing strong for them to take an action. And what's the balance between standing strong for what you can see them become and staying strong that your belief of it being a great fit for them? And not that they need it. I don't believe anybody needs any program, but like really believing that, whoa, this is a great fit for what your desired transformation is. And kind of standing in that, not allowing them to contract, inspiring them to step up, while still being detached for them to choose their own journey. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Where do you find the balance between that?
Very, very well worded and very practical. We're talking about the transfer of energy now. We're talking about their money coming in and your value going out, and I love it. A couple of things there. So number one, getting people to see is one way of doing it. What I found is very powerful is simply asking questions that allow them to see what's already there. And so it's coming up as their idea, not yours. And so anytime, think about it. You can get on the phone for a quote-unquote discovery call, strategy session, whatever the industry is calling it now. But the second you ask for money, you become like a douchebag, right? The second you ask for money, now they're like, oh, well, hey. So the more of their idea it is, the better. And I do believe that if you get on the phone with somebody, you are their only hope. Because if they would have perceived a better option, they'd be on the phone with that person. So the fact that they're on the phone with you means you're it. And so I feel very strongly about that. So in terms of when somebody's facing a decision, the decision is not whether or not to buy your stuff. The decision is whether or not to allow themselves to continue to stay where they're at. And so that's why, when I teach the 4-phase conversation, like the one call close, the reason why it works so well is because people, a lot of providers, coaches, consultants, they'll get on the phone ready to do a tap dance and ready to show and tell and look at all my stuff and it's so great. Nobody gives a flying fuck about our shiny shit. They don't care about our stuff. So that's why the conversation starts with allowing them to tell the truth about where they're at, including and very specifically what problems are they experiencing. And so practical advice, Sebastian, I would just say start your call by saying, hey man, I'm really looking forward to this call, finding out if or how I can help you. I'll ask you a couple of questions. We'll kind of go through it and we'll see what makes the most sense at the end. I'm curious, what's going on? Why are we on this call right now? And you're going to listen. You're going to listen for one of two things, and they're going to fork in one direction or the other. They're either going to go in the information gathering direction, or they're going to go in the problem solving direction. And in order for somebody in order for you to help somebody, you have to work with somebody who has a problem to solve, not somebody who has information to gather. So if somebody says, yeah, Sebastian, I heard about your stuff, man. I love your content. I just want to get some information. Lovingly, I would tell that person, man, that's awesome. I appreciate you saying that. If what you're looking for is information, there's a great website I found. It's called Google. There's a lot of great information there. If what you're looking for is a solution to something, then I'm happy to talk about that. I would just like context as to what is the problem that you like a solution for. See how that opens the entire conversation to really talk about not what's wrong, but give them the floor to talk about something that's not quite right, something that's not sitting with them. And if they don't do that or they won't do that, I wouldn't continue the conversation.
Sure.
So at the end of the call, when it comes down
Right.
to, hey, here's the offer, you're not offering them, here's my program. What you're doing is saying, hey, let's get you out of this pain that you just spent 20 minutes kind of talking about and get you into the vision that you talked about, and let's get you there, like, we can see measurable progress by next Thursday.
Yeah. Yep. And I guess this could be kind of an open-ended deal. The thing that I was thinking about is I experienced that recently and started off much like what you said, so going into the problem and digging into that and getting very specific on the feelings around that, as well as the vision for the future and noticing the gap, and then seeing how a potential solution could be the fit for that gap. And if it only did one thing out of, say, 6 things, would it still be worth it? As long as it did that one thing. And getting yeses along the way. And then when it comes down to it, moving forward, the person feeling like I've got so much going on in my space right now that I feel like to get my inner peace, I gotta just wait till this dies down. And me, of course, saying that, if you can't do it, then really you must, because it's kind of reversed. You cultivate the peace first, I believe, and then the crazy.
On that part, you know that, I know that, we know that, based on our perspective. The moment the prospect detects us pursuing them, what they have to do is they have to run. And so we're just not going to pursue. If somebody's really gotten on the phone with the, which by the way, and this backs up a little bit to marketing and messaging, they should know, and I don't mean this aggressively at all, but they should know that this is a mutual investigation. And they absolutely should know that I've got this thing, event, coaching spot, training, whatever. I've got this thing that's going to happen at this time, and would love to chat with you and see if that's something that will help you. If it doesn't, and if in 2 minutes or 2 hours we determine that it's not the right thing for you, either one of us decides that's totally cool, and I'll go ahead and move to the next person on the list, and I have 38 people that I'm scheduled to talk to in the next 2 weeks so that I can find the 4 best people. So anyway, John Q. Prospect, let's chat. So they then say, well, I need to think about it. Cool, no problem. Just so I'm clear, what exactly is it that's more important in your life than getting out of, describe their problem, so that you can describe their vision. They go, oh, well, got to catch up on Daredevil on Netflix. Like, okay, cool, man. Really appreciate your time. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take your application or your name. I'm going to put it at the bottom of the list of 38 people. And if by some miracle those 38 people are also not a good fit, then I'll reach back to you. How's that sound?
Makes sense.
I mean, it's super simple, man. We're not ever chasing anybody, and that's the essence of the lighthouse versus the tugboat philosophy.
Love it. Thanks, Jesse.
Yeah, man. I can't wait. You're gonna crush it, dude.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for all the value, the wisdom, just openly and authentically sharing yourself, being both an incredible library of so much and a conduit for so much new that just continuously comes through you. Really appreciate you sharing with this group, and you're in the Facebook group now, so anytime you feel like jumping in to comment or share something, you are totally welcome to. Lots of extras.
I feel cool now, man.
You're with the cool kids now. Awesome. So appreciate everything you do. And for you guys, in next, I'll post the links to Jesse's groups in the group as well. So if you guys want to kind of further this conversation on specifically whether it's the video side of things or ethical cult building or a lot of the other stuff that Jesse does, those conversations take place in those Facebook groups as well. And make sure that if you haven't watched it, I'll send out a recording of the Maverick MBA webinar. Jesse covered a ton of really amazing content there. So check that out as well, where you'll hear more of his story and his philosophies on tribe building. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jesse. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Angela later, Ben, Jeffrey later, Dan, Kevin in the parachute room. See you, Sebastian. Bye, guys.
See you guys.
Bye.